The surveillance footage looks like something out of a bad comedy sketch, but the fear on the teller's faces is very, very real. August 2006, New York City. A man storms into a bank, demanding cash, his head completely engulfed in a hollowed-out watermelon. And this wasn't even the strangest part of his plan. That summer, the city baked under an unforgiving August heat. Somewhere between the honking taxis, the rumble of subway trains, and the scent of hot pretzels wafting from street carts, a bizarre crime was about to play out that would leave the NYPD scrambling for answers. The suspect? 28-year-old Bobby Danvers, a small-time hustler from Queens with no history of violence. The weapon? A .38 revolver, real enough to terrify anyone in the room. And the disguise? Not a ski mask, not sunglasses, a watermelon. The story would become an urban legend almost overnight, told in bars and subway cars, retold with laughter, until you learn the details. Then it wasn't funny at all. Before the headlines and the grainy footage, Bobby was just another face in Queens. He lived in a cramped one-bedroom above a laundromat, working odd construction jobs, smoking too much, and spent his evenings at O'Malley's pub where he could make even the grumpiest regular laugh. He was the kind of guy who'd help you fix a leaky pipe or haul a couch, always for cash under the table. He had charm and he had stories, but he also had debts, big ones. Somewhere along the line, he'd gotten tangled up with an illegal betting ring, and by the summer of 2006, the debt collectors weren't asking politely anymore. The week before the robbery, Bobby was spotted pacing outside a Citibank branch on Lexington Avenue. People assumed he was just killing time, but Bobby was measuring the place. He'd read somewhere that police facial recognition struggled with unusual disguises. In his mind, what could be more unusual than a giant, hollowed-out watermelon pulled down over his head? The night before the heist, he walked into a bodega and bought 2 oversized melons. One was for practice, the other was for the job. In his small kitchen, he worked late into the night. The smell of overripe fruit thick in the air, juice running down his arms as he carved a perfect oval for his face. Neighbors would later say they saw him through the window, testing the fit in the reflection of the microwave door. At 10:13 a.m. on August 11th, the plan went into motion. Inside the bank, the morning rush had slowed to a lazy trickle. A teller named Sandra Perez was counting bills when the glass door swung open. She looked up and froze. A man stepped inside, a watermelon covering his entire head. The rind sat flush against his shoulders, the cutout hole revealing only his eyes, cold, focused, unblinking. Without hesitation, he drew a revolver from his waistband. His voice came muffled, distorted to the fruit, but there was no mistaking the threat. Nobody move. Empty the drawers. Now. Sandra's pulse pounded in her ears. The customer stood paralyzed, torn between disbelief and fear. She could smell it. The sweet, sticky scent of watermelon, mingling with a metallic tang of terror in her mouth. He tossed a crumpled tote bag onto the counter. Her hands shook as she stuffed it with cash, the bills crinkling and sliding against each other. From the corner of her eye, she saw a bead of sweat, or maybe watermelon juice, drip from a rind and splatter on the counter. In less than 3 minutes, he had what he came for. Moving backward toward the door, he vanished into the boiling New York heat, leaving behind stunned silence. The NYPD descended on the scene within the hour. The surveillance cameras had caught everything, except a clear shot of his face. Outside, officers canvassed the area. 3 blocks away, they found the tote bag discarded in an alley, the cash inside stained pink from a dye pack that had exploded mid-escape. But the real discovery lay nearby, a hollow watermelon rind, sticky with juice, with traces of sweat clinging to the inside. Detectives bagged it carefully, sending it off for DNA testing. In 2006, that process wasn't quick. Results could take weeks. Witness accounts trickled in. One man claimed he saw the melon guy jogging toward the subway. Another swore he ducked into a pizza shop. A third thought he got into a taxi heading uptown. The stories contradicted each other, and none gave investigators a lead strong enough to pursue. At first, police thought it might have been a college prank gone wrong. But then, another piece of the puzzle surfaced. A deli owner a few blocks away told detectives that on the morning before the robbery, a man had purchased 2 watermelons and left behind a credit card receipt with the name B. Danvers. It seemed almost too easy. When officers went to Bobby's apartment, they found it empty. The fridge was unplugged. The air smelled faintly of spoiled fruit. It was as if he had walked out and never looked back. 2 weeks later, a bus driver came forward with a story that deepened the mystery. He claimed that shortly after the robbery, a man carrying a duffel bag boarded his bus and got off near Port Authority. The man's shirt was stained with pink juice. But here's the strange part. The man wasn't panicked. He wasn't rushing. He was smiling, as if he knew something no one else did. The NYPD listed the watermelon heist as unsolved. Bobby Danvers was never caught, never even questioned. Some say he fled to Florida. Others swear he's still in Queens, living quietly, occasionally spotted eating fruit on his stoop late at night. But there's something the public never heard, something buried in the case files. 3 months after the robbery, another bank across town was hit. Same weapon, same timing. But this time, the disguise wasn't a watermelon. 3 months had passed since the watermelon heist, and New York City had already moved on. Winter was setting in, the August heat now a distant memory, replaced by sharp winds slicing between the skyscrapers. For most people, the Melon Man was a half-forgotten punchline, an urban legend you told to friends over drinks. But for the NYPD's robbery squad, the case file still sat on the desk unsolved, taunting them. Then came December 14th, 2006. At 9:47 a.m., a cold Tuesday morning, the First National Bank on West 23rd Street was quiet. A few customers shuffled in from the biting wind, their breath still hanging in the air as they stepped through the glass doors. The teller on duty, Marcus Howard, was just sliding a deposit slip back to a customer when the doors opened again. He looked up and froze. The man who walked in had the same unhurried stride described by witnesses in August. Same height, same build, but instead of a watermelon, this time his head was covered with something far stranger, a full, hollowed-out pumpkin, its thick orange shell resting heavy on his shoulders. A jagged triangle had been carved for each eye, the crude cuts letting just enough light in for him to see. Marcus thought, for a split second, that it had to be a joke. But then the man reached into his coat and pulled out the exact same weapon, a battered .38 revolver. His voice, muffled to the pumpkin, was deep, steady, and chillingly familiar. Fill the bag. Now! The room went still. The only sound was a faint scrape of pumpkin rind against his jacket as he moved closer. Marcus' hands shook as he grabbed bills from the drawer, his mind racing. This has to be him, the Melon Man. But he didn't dare say a word. Customers stood frozen in place, unsure if they were looking at a desperate man or a complete lunatic. The smell of raw pumpkin flesh mixed with the faint metallic tang of the gun's barrel, creating a scene so surreal that even the security guard hesitated before reaching for his radio. The robber kept it short. Just like before, he took the money, turned, and walked out, never running, never looking over his shoulder. A woman waiting in line swore she saw a faint smile under the pumpkin's jagged grin. Within minutes, the NYPD was on the scene. Detective Frank Marlowe, the same investigator assigned to the watermelon case, stared at the security footage in disbelief. Different disguise, same voice, same calm, controlled movements, and most telling of all, same walk. It wasn't just a copycat, it was him. But this time, he left more than a rhyme behind. A few blocks from the bank, officers found a crumpled paper grocery bag with faint orange stains at the bottom, and inside it, a pumpkin lid, the kind you'd cut out to scoop the insides. On the edge of the stem was a greasy fingerprint, partially smudged but clear enough for lab techs to get excited. When the results came back, they finally had a match. It was, without a doubt, Bobby Danvers. The problem? Bobby had vanished. Detectives scoured his known hangouts in Queens. O'Malley's pub hadn't seen him in months. His old landlord claimed he owed 2 months' rent. A former girlfriend said he'd called her once in October, asking if she could store a few boxes for him, but he never showed up. And then came the twist that changed everything. A week after pumpkin robbery, the NYPD received a call from a pawn shop owner in Yonkers. A man matching Bobby's description had tried to sell him a duffel bag full of cash. Bills so badly stained with dye that the shop owner refused to touch them. The man had gotten agitated, said something about needing to clear a debt, and stormed out. The security footage from the shop showed him clearly. But here's where it got weird. He wasn't wearing a disguise. That led to a chilling realization among the investigators. Bobby wasn't hiding in fear. He was still in the area, still bold, still planning. 2 robberies, 2 seasonal disguises, and a mounting sense of something bigger at play. Detective Marlowe began to suspect these weren't random. The watermelon in August, the pumpkin in December, both perfectly timed to the season. It was almost theatrical, as if Bobby were choosing his disguises not just to hide, but to make a statement. The press picked up on the pattern. The tabloids dubbed him the produced Bandit. Late-night hosts joked about him on TV. But for the NYPD, this wasn't a joke anymore. He wasn't just embarrassing them. He was escalating. In January, an anonymous tip came in claiming Bobby had been seen in Staten Island, walking out of a grocery store with a cart piled high with bananas. Detective Marlowe didn't want to believe it, but deep down he knew what it meant. The Melon Man wasn't done. He was planning his next move, and if the pattern held, the next disguise would be even stranger and even harder to see coming. By the time February rolled around, New York had adjusted to the bizarre new reality that somewhere out there, a man who once wore a watermelon on his head to rob a bank was still at large. The papers couldn't resist running headlines. The tabloids made him a punchline. The public saw him as half clown, half criminal. But to Detective Frank Marlowe, Bobby Danvers wasn't a joke. He was a threat, one who had already outsmarted the police twice. And every week that passed without an arrest only emboldened him. Then came March 17th, 2007, St. Patrick's Day. The morning had started like any other for the Chase Bank branch on Fifth Avenue. The staff wore green hats, paper shamrocks taped to counters. Outside, the sidewalks buzzed with the city's parade crowd. Inside, the mood was festive. That is, until 11:02 a.m., when the glass doors swung open and the room fell silent. At first glance, it looked like a man dressed in a giant green bell pepper had walked into the bank. But as he moved closer, the reality set in. This wasn't a costume. It was real. A hollowed-out green bell pepper, its glossy skin catching the fluorescent lights, stretched across his head and shoulders. 2 jagged holes had been cut for eyes, and another for his mouth. From a distance, it almost looked cartoonish. Up close, it was unnerving. The man's gloved hand slipped inside his coat, pulling out the same battered .38 revolver the NYPD had been chasing for 7 months. His voice was calm, even cheerful. "All right, folks, let's make this quick." The tellers froze. Customers backed toward the wall. Somewhere in the back, a manager pressed a silent alarm. But Bobby, if it was Bobby, moved with the same casual precision as before, sliding a canvas duffel bag across the counter and gesturing for it to be filled. Only this time, there was something different. He didn't stop at one drawer. He demanded access to the vault. The manager, trembling, fumbled with the keys. Inside, stacks of cash sat waiting, more money than Bobby had ever taken before. Outside, sirens wailed in the distance. Time was running out. Witnesses later described the scene as surreal. The sweet, earthy scent of the bell pepper mixed with the musty paper smell of old bills. Bobby moved fast, stuffing the bag with bundles until it bulged. And then, as if on cue, he stopped, looked around to terrified faces, and gave a small, polite nod before heading for the exit. But as he reached the door, the first squad car skidded to a halt outside. Detective Marlowe was in that car. He'd been staking out banks all week, waiting for this moment. He locked eyes with the man through the glass. For a heartbeat, they stared at each other, the hunter and the hunted. Then Bobby did something no one expected. He smiled. Without breaking eye contact, he stepped back from the door, turned toward the emergency exit at the side of the bank, and disappeared. By the time officers burst in through both entrances, he was gone. The aftermath was chaos. Security footage showed him ducking into the emergency stairwell, but the next camera on the landing never caught him. It was as if he'd vanished into thin air. Witnesses outside claimed they saw a man in a green hoodie slip into the crowd of parade goers, but none could confirm it was Bobby. When they counted the stolen cash, the number was staggering. It was more than the watermelon and pumpkin robberies combined, enough to pay off debts and vanish for good. Days turned into weeks, then months. No sightings, no leads. The NYPD kept the case open, but even Marlowe began to wonder if Bobby had finally done it, pulled off the big one and disappeared forever. Then, almost a year later, a package arrived at the 23rd Precinct. No return address. Inside was a single dried green bell pepper, its skin wrinkled and brittle. Stuffed inside was a note written in neat block letters. Thanks for the chase. There was no signature, no fingerprints, just a faint, lingering scent of something sweet and earthy. Detective Marlowe still keeps that pepper in an evidence bag on his desk. He swears he'll get Bobby one day. But sometimes late at night, when the city quiets down, he wonders, did Bobby retire on a beach somewhere, living off his bell pepper score? Or is he still here, planning his next disguise, waiting for the perfect moment to walk back into a bank? Wearing something even stranger? Because if history has taught the NYPD anything, it's that when Bobby Danvers decides to make a move, you'll smell him coming before you see him. The last time anyone saw Bobby Danvers, he wasn't hiding in some dingy Queens apartment or slipping into a subway crowd. He was on a yacht. It was a blistering summer afternoon in the Bahamas, turquoise water glistening like glass. Locals watched as a lean, tan man leaned against the rail of a sleek, white boat anchored just offshore. He wore designer sunglasses, a gold watch, and a smirk that seemed permanently etched into his face. He raised a glass of champagne in the direction of a passing fishing boat, as if toasting to his own good fortune. The man looked familiar, too familiar, and when a tourist with zoom lens camera snapped a picture, the internet lit up, the jawline, the build, the grin. It was him, the produced Bandit. But how did a broke, debt-ridden handyman from Queens become a man sipping champagne on a yacht, surrounded by crystal-clear water? To understand that, you have to go back. Before the headlines, before the disguises and the ridiculous nicknames, Bobby Danvers' life was small and heavy. He lived in a tiny, mold-stained apartment above a laundromat where the washing machines shook the floor at all hours. The radiator groaned in the winter, the windows stuck in summer. Some nights he went to bed with the smell of fried food from the downstairs diner, clinging to his clothes because he couldn't afford to run the fan. Work was patchy. One week he'd be hanging drywall for a contractor who paid in cash. The next week he'd be hauling trash for a guy who paid in beer. He never saved a dime because there was never a dime to save. And then came the betting. It started small, just a few dollars on the Yankees. But Bobby was chasing something. Maybe excitement. Maybe the idea that luck could be his escape. Luck wasn't. Debt collectors came. They weren't patient. One February night in 2006, Bobby sat in that cramped apartment, the glow of the streetlight spilling across his kitchen table. He had a single can of beans in the cupboard, an eviction notice on the counter, and a voicemail from a man who said, in no uncertain terms, that he had until the end of the week to come up with the money. That night, Bobby stared at the ceiling and thought about masks, about money, about the strange ways people outweed systems. Somewhere in that sleepless haze, the seed of an idea took root. Fast forward to the yacht. The photo of Bobby, or the man who looked exactly like him, spread like wildfire. True crime forums tore it apart. Was it really him? Some swore the gold watch matched the one stolen from a pawn shop months after the bell pepper heist. Others pointed out a faint scar above his eyebrow. One witness is remembered from his younger days in Queens. And then a week later, a video surfaced. Shaky cell phone footage from a tourist jet ski, catching the same man stepping off a yacht and into a small dinghy headed toward a secluded island. He was laughing, shirtless, completely at ease. On his shoulder was a canvas duffel bag. Theories exploded. Had Bobby laundered the money? Had he partnered with someone overseas? Or, more dangerously, was he planning something bigger? Something international? Detective Marlowe, now long removed from the case officially, couldn't shake the feeling that Bobby's appearance wasn't an accident. It was bait. Bobby wanted to be seen. And if that was true, it meant only one thing. He wasn't done. The last frame of the tourist video shows Bobby stepping onto the sand, the turquoise water lapping at his ankles. In the background, you can see something just barely, an outline of another boat, larger, darker, moored far from shore. Some viewers swear they saw movement on that boat. Others say it was just the waves. But to this day, no one knows who or what was waiting for him on that island. The footage from that tourist camera had been analyzed, debated, and obsessed over for weeks. The man stepping off the yacht and onto the sand, gold watch glinting in the sun, duffel bag slung casually over his shoulder, was almost certainly Bobby Danvers. But it wasn't just that moment that caught people's attention. It was what came after. A few days later, a local fisherman in Bahamas claimed he'd ferried a smiling American with a lot of cash to a remote island about 20 miles from the tourist strip. The man had paid him in crisp U.S. hundreds, told him to keep the change, and disappeared into the dense palm forest that lined the shore. What the fisherman didn't realize was that this wasn't some castaway adventure. This was a meeting. Bobby had been living quiet on the island for months, blending in with a small, tight-lipped expat community. Drifters, former smugglers, people who didn't ask questions. But behind the easy smiles and long afternoons drinking rum, something was brewing. Word spread of a man organizing a crew for a job that wasn't local. Something involving boats. Something involving a bank. Only this time, the bank wouldn't be in Queens or even on the mainland. It would be somewhere no one was watching. A week before the job, Bobby was seen in the island's tiny market, bargaining for a cart full of pineapples. No one thought much of it. Tourists bought fruit all the time. But then, in the quiet back room of a crumbling seaside shack, those pineapples were being hollowed out, one by one. If the watermelon was ridiculous and the pumpkin was theatrical, the pineapple was pure misdirection. Each one could be worn like a helmet, spiky, strange, and perfect for the humid island heat. And in Bobby's mind, no one would see it coming. The target was a bank in Nassau, small but flush with cash from the seasonal tourist influx. Security was minimal, the vault aging, and the guards lazy from long days and sun. On the morning of the heist, the streets bustled with music and food vendors. Bobby and his crew, 3 men and 1 woman, all wearing hollowed-out pineapples on their heads, blended in like some absurd street performance. They moved quickly, slipping into bank just before the noon rush. Witnesses later said it was like watching a carnival turn into a nightmare. The scent of pineapple was thick in the air as Bobby barked orders, the same battered .38 in his hand. His crew fanned out, herding customers and tellers away from the counters. Within minutes, they were in the vault, stuffing canvas bags with stacks of Bahamian and U.S. currency. But this wasn't a smash and grab. Bobby had planned an exit, unlike anything he'd done before. Instead of fleeing into the streets, the crew moved straight through a service corridor that led to a dock behind the building. Waiting there was a sleek speedboat, engine idling, its driver hidden behind sunglasses and a black bandana. They were gone in under 7 minutes. The escape route had been calculated to the second. The boat didn't head straight out to sea, but instead zigzagged through a series of narrow channels between islands, the kind only locals knew how to navigate. By the time police patrols were alerted, the crew had vanished into the turquoise maze. Hours later, the speedboat was found drifting empty on a deserted beach, the sand littered with pineapple husks. No one saw Bobby again for months. But here's the part that still haunts investigators. The bank security footage, reviewed frame by frame, shows something strange in the moments before the crew entered. Across the street, leaning against a lamppost, was a man in a green hoodie, watching the whole thing unfold. He never moved, never spoke, just watched. And when police tried to enhance the footage, the outline of his face looked eerily familiar. It wasn't Bobby. It was someone from his past. The Nassau police had combed through hours of security footage, but it was that single frame, frozen and grainy, that made every investigator lean forward in their chair. A man in a green hoodie, standing completely still as chaos unfolded behind him. To most people, he was just a bystander. But to those who'd known Bobby Danvers back in New York, that face sparked an instant, uneasy recognition. His name was Vincent Vince Caro. Bobby and Vince's history was a tangle of petty hustles, late-night get-rich schemes, and failed robberies that ended in slammed doors and bruised egos. Vince was the kind of guy who'd smile while he took your last dollar. The kind of man who could shake your hand with one and pick your pocket with the other. And Bobby, well, Bobby had trusted him once. Just once. Their last meeting before Bobby vanished from the States had ended badly. Bobby had been nursing a busted lip and an empty wallet after Vince's sure-thing poker night turned out to be a setup. He swore he'd never work with Vince again. But in the months after the watermelon job, with Bobby's name splashed across every crime board in the Northeast, maybe Vince saw an opportunity. Because here he was, thousands of miles from Queens, wearing that green hoodie in tropical heat, standing like a sentinel while Bobby robbed a bank in Pineapples. Coincidence? Not a chance. 2 weeks after the Nassau heist, a rumor started circulating in the island bars. A rumor about a vault. Not just any vault, but a private one belonging to a luxury resort on a neighboring island. The kind of place where the ultra-wealthy kept cash, jewels, and, according to whispers, untraceable bearer bonds. And here's the strange part. Bobby hadn't been seen in public, but Vince had. He was buying drinks, talking big, dropping hints about a score that would make the pineapple job look like chump change. To the locals, it sounded like drunken bravado. To those who knew the game, it sounded like bait. When a speedboat was spotted heading toward that resort's private dock late one night, no one could say for sure who was on board. But the dock security cameras caught a shadow stepping off first. Tall, lean, moving with the same loose swagger as a man in the green hoodie. Behind him came another figure, shorter, carrying a duffel bag. The shorter man's walk was unmistakable. Bobby Danvers. If this was a reunion, it wasn't the warm kind. Witnesses on the island later described hearing raised voices coming from a rented beachfront bungalow. Two men arguing, one of them shouting about debts and unfinished business. And then silence. The next morning, that same speedboat was found floating near the reef, the deck slick with seawater and something darker. Inside the cabin, there was no sign of either man. Just a single green hoodie, drenched and crumpled in the corner. But here's the thing. Locals swore they saw Bobby later that week, stepping off a small charter plane with a smirk and a ticket to somewhere even farther away. If that's true, then where's Vince? The plan was supposed to be foolproof. Vince had mapped out every camera angle, every guard rotation, every window of opportunity to get in and out before anyone knew the vault had been touched. Bobby wasn't convinced. He'd pulled enough jobs to know that when something sounds perfect, that's when you get killed. But the payout Vince promised was staggering. Tens of millions in cash, gold bars, and those elusive bearer bonds that could vanish into offshore accounts without a trace. Against his better judgment, Bobby said yes. The night of the heist was windless, the ocean like glass. They approached the resort's private dock in silence, the hum of the boat's motor low enough to blend with the waves. Vince went first, moving like he owned the place. Bobby followed, duffel bag swinging at his side, every nerve in his body screaming that something was off. They bypassed two sleeping security guards, cut through the service entrance, and made their way into the belly of the building. Vince moved with surgical precision, entering key codes and swiping clearance cards that no ordinary thief should have had. "Don't ask where I got these," Vince whispered. Inside the vault, it was chaos in the best way. Stacks of crisp bills, velvet cases of diamond jewelry, gold bars lined up like bricks of sunlight. Bobby's pulse pounded in his ears. This was it, the score that would end his running. But while Bobby stuffed the duffel, Vince's hands weren't on the loot. They were on a small black device wired into the vault security system. "What the hell is that?" Bobby hissed. "Insurance," Vince said, smirking. "For me?" That's when the alarms went off. Not the loud, blaring kind, but the silent ones, the kind that call in every cop within 10 miles without you even knowing. Vince turned, duffel slung over his shoulder, and started walking away. Bobby realized in that instant Vince had set him up. The sound of boots thundered in the hall. Bobby grabbed the nearest bag and bolted after Vince, weaving through service corridors until they burst onto the dock. Their boat was still there, but so were the flashing lights of approaching patrol craft. They jumped in, gunned the engine, and tore into the night. For a moment, it felt like they might make it, but then the first spotlight hit them, blinding and white-hot. Vince reached for something in his jacket. A gun! Bobby's had told him to duck, and in that split second, a crack split the air. Not from Vince's gun, but from a sniper on the lead patrol boat. Vince crumpled, the bag spilling across the deck, cash and diamonds scattering into the sea. Bobby tried to take the wheel, but another shot rang out, shattering it. The boat spun, slammed into the reef, and threw him hard onto the deck. When he came to, there were hands on him, cold metal cuffs snapping shut. A voice said, "Robert Danvers, you're under arrest." Vince lay face down on the deck, unmoving. The green hoodie was gone, replaced by a crimson stain spreading fast. That was the end. No more disguises, no more fruit jokes, no more clever escapes. Bobby Danvers, the man who robbed banks with watermelons, pumpkins, and pineapples, was finally going to face the one disguise he couldn't take off, an orange prison jumpsuit. And somewhere in the distance, the waves carry away the last of the loot, sinking into the dark,